The most valuable piece of farmland you may ever own may be the room you almost forgot existed. Not a field. Not a greenhouse. Not an acre bought with debt and watered with anxiety. A sealed spare bedroom, a dim basement, a garage corner lined with shelves, where a silent living network feeds on what the rest of the world throws away and turns it into food so prized, so efficient, so absurdly productive that once you see the numbers, your entire idea of property begins to feel outdated. Because this system does not ask for more land. It asks for awareness. It asks whether you can recognize that in an age of collapsing margins, expensive housing, fragile jobs, industrial food, and rising dependence, one of the most overlooked engines of self-sufficiency is not mechanical at all. It is biological. And it is waiting in the dark. Most people have been trained to believe that security has to be large, official, expensive, visible. They think freedom comes from promotions, portfolios, credentials, scale. They think food production belongs to people with tractors and acreage. They think real business requires storefronts, payroll, ads, logistics, permission. So they keep postponing the possibility of real leverage because every path they have been shown seems gated by capital they do not have, land they cannot afford, and institutions they do not control. Meanwhile, hidden below the noise of modern ambition, there is a system that breaks almost every rule they were taught. It grows vertically instead of horizontally. It converts waste instead of consuming premium inputs. It thrives in controlled rooms instead of open fields. It produces food in weeks, not seasons. And if it is run correctly, it can transform dead household space into a living production engine that feeds people, supplies markets, and generates real cash flow with a startup barrier so low it feels almost offensive once you compare it to everything else. That system is indoor specialty mushroom cultivation, not the watered-down hobby version people imagine when they hear the word mushroom, not a decorative log in the backyard, not a novelty kit on a windowsill, but a compact, climate-controlled, repeatable production model built around one uncomfortable truth. Some of the most powerful economic systems in the world stay invisible simply because they are too strange to fit the story everyone else is still living inside. And before you dismiss that as exaggeration, understand what makes this different. This is not fantasy. This is not one of those seductive online myths that evaporates the second real math enters the room. Human beings have been cultivating mushrooms for centuries because the biological logic is too strong to ignore. Long before modern wellness culture rediscovered fungi and turned them into capsules, powders, and trends, entire communities understood what these organisms could do. They understood that if you can take low-value organic matter and convert it inside compact space into nutrient-dense, premium food with exceptional speed, then you are not just growing a crop. You are bending the economics of agriculture itself. That insight survived because it worked. What changed in the modern era is the market around it. Today, chefs want freshness they cannot get from anonymous distribution chains. Consumers want quality they can see and taste. Grocers want local supply. Health-conscious buyers already know names like lion's mane, shiitake, oyster, chestnut. Demand does not need to be invented. It already exists. What is missing in most towns and cities is a disciplined local producer capable of supplying it with consistency. That is where the hidden opportunity begins. Because the moment you stop thinking of a room as a room and start thinking of it as controlled productive volume, a new map appears. A spare bedroom is no longer a storage problem. It is infrastructure. A basement is no longer unfinished space. It is environmental stability. A garage is no longer a compromise. It is square footage waiting for conversion. That is the first shift, and it is psychological before it is financial. You stop asking what you can buy, and you start asking what biology can do inside space you already control. And the reason so few people ever hear this explained clearly is not because some dramatic conspiracy is hiding it. It is because powerful systems do not like ideas that reduce dependence on the systems themselves. Banks understand land, loans, and collateral. Universities understand broadacre agriculture. Supply chains understand centralized distribution. Governments understand categories they can regulate in familiar ways. But a person turning local waste streams into high-value fresh food in a room on private property does not fit neatly into any old script. It is too decentralized. Too efficient. Too small to be institutionalized and too powerful to be easily ignored by the people who stumble onto it. So the knowledge drifts. It survives in manuals, grower circles, workshops, forums, side conversations, local farms, and the minds of people who figured out that one of the fastest ways to step outside fragile systems is to learn how to run a smaller one of your own. And what makes this one so potent is that the underlying mechanics are almost brutally elegant. Mushrooms are not plants. They do not need sunlight to manufacture sugars from the sky. They need substrate, moisture, oxygen, the right temperature, the right humidity, and living fungal genetics capable of colonizing fast and fruiting hard. That means the foundation of production is not topsoil. It is cellulose, lignin, and organic waste. Hardwood sawdust. Straw. Soy hulls. Coffee waste. Agricultural leftovers. Materials most businesses regard as disposal problems become the base layer of a high-value food system. That inversion is where the economics start to feel unreal. In traditional farming, land is the sacred bottleneck. Here, the equivalent of land is often cheap or free. In traditional farming, weather dictates. Here, environment is engineered. In traditional farming, distance erodes quality. Here, proximity is part of the value. In traditional farming, scale usually demands debt. Here, scale can begin with shelving. That does not mean mushrooms are magic. It means they are efficient in ways most modern people have never been taught to notice. Mycelium is a decomposer. It exists to move into dead organic matter, digest it, occupy it, and under the right conditions produce fruiting bodies with startling force. Your role as the operator is not to force life into existence. Your role is to create the exact conditions under which that life wants to express itself as food. And when you do, the room changes character. What looked like stacked bags becomes a colony. What looked like white fuzz becomes stored energy. What looked dormant becomes explosive. Then one morning pins appear, tiny clustered forms pushing through the surface, and within days those clusters unfold into thick oyster shells, dense shiitake caps, or pale lion's mane bursting outward like underwater coral. It does not feel like gardening. It feels like witnessing a mechanism that was waiting for someone to understand it. That emotional impact matters more than people think, because hidden systems become life-changing not only when they produce money, but when they alter how a person relates to reality. A person who learns how to convert waste into premium food inside a room begins to see leverage everywhere. They stop feeling entirely trapped inside systems designed by other people. And the structure of the operation is what makes that transformation possible. At the center is culture, the live genetic line you are running. Everything starts there. Good genetics colonize faster, fruit more evenly, resist stress better, and produce product people actually want. This is the biological software of the operation. Many beginners sensibly start with purchase spawn because it removes complexity and gets the cycle moving. But over time, the deeper power reveals itself. Biology can be expanded. A clean culture can move into grain. Grain can inoculate more substrate. That substrate becomes harvest, and the line continues. In other words, one of your most important inputs is not simply bought and consumed. It can be managed, multiplied, preserved. The system begins to reproduce parts of itself under your supervision. That is not a trivial advantage. That is the kind of advantage conventional businesses spend fortunes trying to build. Then comes substrate preparation, where romantic fantasies about easy money usually die and serious operators quietly separate themselves from everyone else. Because what kills mushroom production is not a lack of possibility. It is contamination, sloppiness, impatience, and the arrogance of people who think biology will forgive disorder. It will not. The substrate must be hydrated properly, handled cleanly, and pasteurized or sterilized with purpose. Competing molds and bacteria are always present, always waiting, always faster than an inattentive beginner thinks. This is why the system is powerful but not soft. It rewards precision. A lazy person can buy gear and still fail. A careful person can build a room from modest materials and succeed. That is the hidden justice of it. Nature does not care about branding. It cares about conditions. After inoculation comes incubation, and incubation is where a lot of people learn patience for the first time in years. You pack your substrate, inoculate it, seal it, place it into stable conditions, and then the visible world becomes quiet. Nothing dramatic happens from the outside. But inside, the mycelium is moving, threading, occupying, converting, claiming the block as its own. This phase teaches a lesson that reaches beyond mushrooms. So much of meaningful production in life is invisible before it becomes undeniable. If you quit too early, you misread the process. If you panic because nothing looks cinematic yet, you ruin what was already working. Mycelium rewards trust backed by observation. Then comes fruiting, the part that almost feels supernatural the first time you witness it. Temperature shifts. Humidity rises. Fresh air exchange increases. The organism interprets these changes as the signal to reproduce. Suddenly, the room that held white colonized blocks becomes a chamber of emergence. Pins form. Clusters swell. Caps unfurl. Lion's mane spills outward in thick white cascades. The speed is what gets people. You can look at a shelf in the morning and look again the next day and feel as if the room has been quietly manufacturing abundance while the rest of the house slept. And in a sense, it has. That is why the system is so emotionally arresting. It turns hidden labor into visible life fast enough to keep momentum alive. Then there is species selection, which is not about novelty but strategy. Oyster mushrooms are often the gateway because they colonize aggressively, fruit generously, tolerate a range of conditions, and move well in almost every market. They teach the rhythm. They teach the operator how the room behaves. Shiitake offers slower cycles but established demand, denser texture, and better shelf life. Lion's mane lives at the crossroads of culinary desire and health market fascination, which is why it can command such attention when done well. The mistake is to chase all of it at once. The disciplined operator begins where success is most probable, where biology and market align cleanly, then expands from competence rather than curiosity. That decision alone can save months of frustration. Because the true mechanism here is not grow mushrooms and get rich. It is far more precise than that. Source low-cost substrate. Prepare it cleanly. Inoculate with strong genetics. Colonize in stable conditions. Trigger fruiting in controlled environments. Harvest at peak quality. Sell into markets that value freshness. Repeat on a schedule. That repetition is the engine. One batch is interesting. A pipeline is income. Once you establish the cycle, dead time disappears. Something is always being inoculated. Something is always colonizing. Something is always fruiting. Something is always ready to harvest. Something is always being sold. And once the cycle is steady, the room is no longer a project. It is a system. That distinction changes everything. A project ends. A system compounds. Even the outputs tell a larger story. Fresh mushrooms are the obvious product, yes, but they are not the only value being created. Spent substrate becomes compost or soil amendment. Knowledge accumulates with every batch. Better culture handling improves future margins. Customer trust becomes recurring demand. The room itself, once configured, becomes a fixed asset whose usefulness deepens the more skillful you become. That is what makes the economics feel so disproportionate. The raw inputs are modest. The product is premium. The learning curve is real but fast. The space is compact. The turnover is frequent. The market is often undersupplied. There are not many systems that combine all of those qualities at once. But none of this matters if the operator cannot handle the truth that serious independence is repetitive before it is glamorous. Clean tools. Clean hands. Clean workflows. Batch logs. Humidity checks. Airflow adjustments. Watching for contamination. Tracking timing. Learning which shelf fruits better and why. This is the texture of real autonomy. Not aesthetic freedom. Operational freedom. The kind that comes from understanding a process so well that results stop feeling lucky. And that is where the transformation begins for most people who stick with it. At first, the goal is simple: prove it works. One room. One species. One controlled cycle. Learn how to create healthy blocks. Learn how to fruit them consistently. Learn how to bring a product to market that makes people remember the difference between fresh and stale, local and shipped, alive and exhausted. The first milestone is not a big number. It is repeatability. Can you do it again next week? Can you do it cleaner? Can you do it with less waste? Can you deliver when you said you would? That is the threshold between hobby and production. And once you cross it, the room begins to change your identity. You are no longer someone trying something. You are someone running something. That shift sounds small until you live it. Because when you are running a biological production cycle, your relationship to time changes. You are not waiting for someday. You are managing now. In the first month, the work is humble. You gather the shelving, meters, humidification, airflow, containers, substrate, cultures. You build the room. You calibrate it. You discover how much of success is hidden in details nobody praises. In the second month, your early batches begin colonizing and the learning becomes sharper. Some bags thrive. Some fail. Good. Failure at this stage is expensive only to the ego. Every contaminated block teaches a law. Every clean block confirms one. Then, somewhere around the third month, the first true harvest arrives, and this is the moment many people never forget. Because all the invisible work suddenly becomes visible weight in your hands. Clusters cut at the base. Fresh product on a scale. Condensation on a cold bag. A chef lifting the lid and pausing. A market customer stopping mid-sentence because the mushrooms look unlike anything in the grocery store. Money exchanged for something that did not come from a field, a truck, or a factory, but from a room on your property that used to hold neglected objects. The emotional force of that moment is difficult to overstate. It does not just prove the concept. It exposes how much dormant productive power may have been around you all along. From months 3 to 6, the operation gains shape. You refine the room. You refine the schedule. You learn your contamination weak points, your best performing substrate, your most dependable species, your fastest selling products, your realistic weekly capacity. You begin to understand that the business is not built on mushrooms alone but on consistency. Chefs care about quality, yes, but even more than that they care about trust. Market customers care about novelty, yes, but even more than that they care about returning and finding you there again. Trust is what converts a flush into recurring revenue. By months 6 to 12, scaling becomes possible, not because you are fantasizing harder, but because the system has become coherent enough to expand without collapsing. More shelves. More blocks. More species if justified. A second fruiting area. Standing restaurant orders. A farmer's market presence. Direct subscriptions. The room becomes 2 rooms. The spare room becomes the garage. The garage becomes a micro-farm. And unlike so many modern business models, growth does not require abandoning the logic that made it work. You are not leaping into a completely different reality. You are extending a discipline system you already understand. That makes the expansion unusually stable for those who stay sober. And as the operation matures, new branches appear. Grow kits for home cooks. Educational workshops. Dehydrated products. Culinary partnerships. Compost sales. Spawn work for advanced operators. Value-added products where regulations allow. A local brand built not on empty story, but on visible quality. Again, none of this should be rushed, because premature expansion destroys more promising operations than competition ever will. But the point matters. The room does not only produce mushrooms. It can produce reputation, resilience, and multiple streams of value anchored in the same biological foundation. That is rare. It is also why the system has deeper relevance than a side hustle. It restores a kind of confidence modern life has almost trained out of people. Most individuals today live at the mercy of prices, employers, landlords, supply chains, and distant decisions they cannot influence. They are not powerless because they lack talent. They are powerless because they lack controllable systems. Indoor mushroom cultivation is not a universal solution, but it is one of the clearest examples of controllable production most people can actually begin. It takes something ancient, fungal decomposition, and turns it into something deeply modern, compact local food infrastructure. It reduces dependence on acreage. It reduces dependence on seasonality. It reduces dependence on long-distance freshness. It reduces dependence on permission. And perhaps that is the deepest reason it feels so electrifying once it clicks. It reveals that real leverage is often smaller, quieter, and more biological than the culture of constant spectacle wants you to believe. No one has to clap when you clean a fruiting room. No one has to validate you while you pasteurize substrate. No one has to understand what those white blocks on the shelf are becoming. The system does not need applause to work. It only needs conditions. And that makes it powerful in a way loud ambitions rarely are. Because if larger systems wobble, people still need food. If restaurant demand softens, households still cook. If money tightens, premium ingredients sourced locally can become more attractive, not less, because people want value they can trust. If inflation keeps chewing through conventional costs, waste-fed biological production remains on different footing than businesses built on expensive inputs and thin margins. And if the world grows more unstable, the person who knows how to convert low-value material into beautiful, nourishing, high-demand food inside a controlled room is living by a different script than the person who depends entirely on systems they have never learned to replace. That is why the ending of this story matters. Because what begins as a mushroom room often becomes something larger than the numbers. It becomes evidence. Evidence that not every path to freedom runs through institutions. Evidence that a living system can outperform a dead assumption. Evidence that abundance is sometimes hidden inside whatever the culture has taught you not to notice. Years from now, while others are still waiting for certainty, still negotiating with fragility, still hoping the systems above them do not fail, you may be opening a cool door into a bright humid room where gray oyster shelves fold outward like waves and lion's mane hangs in white cascades from stacked blocks of transformed waste, and you will feel, with absolute clarity, that the room is doing more than producing mushrooms. It is producing calm. It is producing leverage. It is producing the quiet kind of freedom the modern world almost never advertises because the quiet kind cannot be sold back to you once you know how to build it yourself. And that may be the most important part of all. Not the money, though the money is real. Not the novelty, though the process never fully loses its magic. The most important part is the shift inside the person who learns to see a forgotten room, a pile of waste, a living culture, and a repeatable cycle and realize that independence was never as far away as it looked. It was waiting in the dark for someone disciplined enough to turn on the light.